Live the Goals Podcast, episode number 216.
Live the Goals Podcast, your place for motivation, life lessons, and laughter. Don't settle for wandering through a mundane life. Instead, let us help you reach your goals and live a fulfilling life doing what you love. Our guests know what it's like to live with purpose and laugh along the way. Warning, if you're a stick in the mud, you definitely need to stick around. Loosen up your ties, kick off your high heels, and let's get to it with your host, Dale Richardson.
Welcome back to another episode of Live the Goals Podcast. Happy to have you back with us today for an interview episode of Live the Goals Podcast. Today, we're interviewing Dr. Christopher Lewis. Then he's going to talk to us a little bit about how to have success in law school as well as beyond. But for those of you that are not lawyers or aren't law school students, I want you to still pay attention to this episode. There's still so much you can get out of this. You can make analogies to other disciplines in school as well as in life and business. I'm always looking for ways to connect the dots and take what works over here and apply it over there. So this is a great episode for you to do that on if you're not in law school. But if you are in law school, fantastic episode to listen to, especially if you're in your first year or going to be going into your first year of law school. Now, if this is your first time joining us, I'd love for you to go back to episode 0 so that you can hear what this podcast is all about. And friends and family, don't forget the exciting news from just last week. Live the Goals Podcast now has an app as well. You can download the app in the iTunes store or in Google Play. All you have to do is go to Google Play or iTunes and search for the app. Search for Live the Goals, all one word together, or search for my name, Dale Richardson, and the app will come right on up. Now, friends and family, with no further ado, let's get into today's interview with Dr. Christopher Lewis. Okay, friends and family, let's get started. I am excited to introduce my guest today. My guest today is Dr. Christopher Lewis. And Christopher Lewis is a higher education professional working in student affairs for almost 20 years. And in 2015, the Distinguished Service Award from the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators and the Student Affairs Partnering with Academic Affairs was renamed to the Dr. Christopher A. Lewis Distinguished Service Award. And that was renamed for his commitment to promoting a better understanding and partnership between academic affairs and student affairs within higher education. Dr. Lewis is a blogger, a podcaster, and most importantly, a father of 2. Chris, are you ready to help us set and reach goals that matter?
Well, you know it. I'm ready to make things happen.
Let's do this. I've given our friends and family just kind of a brief overview of who you are, a little bit of your accomplishments, but I'd love for you, Chris, to take a minute or two here and fill in the gaps for us.
Well, I truly appreciate being here today. You know, I've completely enjoyed listening to your show over the last many episodes that you have had, and it is a pleasure to be on and talking with everyone today. You know, I'm kind of humbled by what you said there. You know, I'm definitely a humble person. I'm not looking for accolades. So, you know, when I was recognized by the SAPA knowledge community within NASPA, it was definitely something that kind of floored me. But that being said, you know, I loved what you said at the end, that most importantly, I'm a father of 2. And I think that for me,
Yes.
that is most important in my life. And you have to have priorities in your life. So when you're talking about reaching your goals and living your goals, you have to have goals in your life professionally, but really personally, you have to have goals. And I try to talk to all of the students that I work with on a daily basis about that. But also, I love the message that you're sharing and being able to encourage people to do the same.
Thank you, Chris. And friends and family, I'll tell you, when he says he's humble, he's not joking. You know, we'll talk a little bit later. I was on his podcast And not until I started doing a little research for this one did I even know you were a doctor. I mean, that's, most doctors will not let you forget that they are a doctor. And Dr. Lewis here is just good old Chris, and I had a great time on your podcast and just so down to earth. And I'm looking forward to really sharing some value here with our friends and family, especially the law school community. We're going to talk a lot to the law school community today. As you all know, I'm a lawyer, went to law school, and there's just so much that we can pick apart and dive into regarding success for law school students. And so, Chris, before we get into all of that, my friends and family know that I always start my episodes asking my guests for a funny story. So I'd love to hear something that made you laugh recently.
As a father of two, I am always finding myself laughing at things that my kids do. And I have to say that recently the kids have been super silly with the holidays coming around and, putting on silly outfits and just being around the house and acting kind of crazy. And I think a lot of that's getting squirrely, getting ready for the holidays itself. But, so it's not a specific story, but, I think that just the small moments in life, bring a smile to your face are what's most important. Mm-hmm. And for me, even though, it's not something that someone said or something that specifically stands out like that, it's those small moments that I always think back to.
Yes. And, we make such a big deal about the big moments, but it really is when you kind of stop and think about somebody and you think back about your connection with people. It's those small moments that kind of just all add up to build that relationship and that connection. So true there. So true. And let's do this. Let's go ahead and jump into what we're here to talk about. As I mentioned, Chris and I originally connected when he interviewed me for his podcast that he does for law school students called The Law School Insider. And as many lawyers can attest to, Chris, law school in general can be a very stressful time in the life of a young aspiring lawyer. So let's just start in general with law school. As someone who works with law school students, what would you say to somebody who's not yet in law school, who's maybe contemplating whether or not they want to go to law school? Do you have any advice for them?
I should probably preface this by saying that I'm the Director of Enrollment Programs and Student Services at Western Michigan University Cooley Law School. So I should probably preface that. So I've worked with a lot of students throughout their entire law school experience. So I work with students from the front door, before they even enter the front door, all the way to the time that they are graduating. So in regards to success and thinking about things that they should be thinking about, especially on the front end, I would say that first and foremost, I always tell students, make sure you are asking the right questions. So when you are looking at considering law school and you're looking at all of the different law schools that are out there, you've got a lot of options. Don't put all of the weight on just what you're reading online or what you're seeing in a guide on what the best law schools are. Have questions and information that you need to have to be able to make a fair decision on all of the law schools you're considering. The reason I say that is the fact that there are many law schools out there that you may never have heard of. There are schools that you've never heard of and cities that you may never have heard of. That doesn't mean that they are not quality schools. It just means that you're not aware of them. So you want to make sure that, if the location is most important to you, then you put that on your list. If cost is very important, put it on your list. If you need to be in an area where there is public transportation, put it on your list. Have a list and then set each school that you're considering side by side with one another so that when you're evaluating your options, that it's apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So that's one piece that I would definitely tell someone on the front end. The other thing that I think that I would put out there is that law school is different than any other type of educational opportunity that you've ever had. It's going to challenge you in so many different ways than you've ever been challenged in regards to the amount of reading, the amount of writing, the amount of analysis and attention to detail in undergraduate degrees or even other graduate degrees, typically you are not going to be asked to do the same amount of work or the same amount of rigor as you will have in this. Now, I'm being a bit generic in this because somebody might have gone to medical school or somewhere else and said, "Oh my gosh, this was really, really hard." And I haven't gone to medical school. My doctorate's not in medicine, so I can't say that law school is as difficult as medical school. It is difficult in a different way, but it is going to be very challenging. I'm not saying that to scare people away, but I'm just telling people to have a realistic point of view. And then the other final thing that I think that I would say is that make sure that when you are considering law schools, don't only make a decision based on what you see on their website. Visit the school and have questions that are important to you that get answered, but don't only get the answers from people from the Office of Admissions, but when you're there and you see a student walking by, ask a student or say to the admission office, "I'd like to talk to a student," or "I'd like to sit in on a class. I'd like to be able to have this experience while I'm here," and take advantage of the opportunity to see and experience it from a student's point of view. So those are a couple of things that I think that I would say from the very front end. Because there's a lot of other things, but I think those are three big things that I've been able to kind of glean in my years now in law school education, and in the interviews that we've had on the Law School Insider as well.
Yeah, and so if you're listening and you're considering law school, now what Chris just said may sound pretty straightforward, but it is so deep. It is worth its weight in gold if you're considering law school. Those are so important. And, what happens sometimes, Chris, is that someone thinks that it's just kind of, we'll say, simple advice or something like that, and then they don't do it. And you'll be surprised how many people don't do what you just said. How many people don't visit the school? How many people don't make a list of what's important to them? Because ultimately, you're going to be the one at the school, right? And so you need those questions to reflect what's important to you, like Chris just said. And I love your advice, Chris, of talking to the students there. You'll get sometimes set up with some students that Student Affairs might have chaperone you around or guide you around, so you can ask them a million questions. But guess what? If you run across somebody in the hall, if you happen to be sitting around before you meet with somebody, just pull another student to the side and ask them as well. And one little caveat I'll throw in there, make sure you are getting a good sense of who you're talking to so you can filter out any biases. You might just happen to run into the one student that absolutely despises the school. So talk to many people and get a better sense of what you can expect at that school. So Chris, really, really great advice to people who are considering law schools. Especially, I don't want you to miss the fact that you should be considering all schools you come across, all schools you know about, any of them that might fit into your criteria, because it's really easy, Chris. I think you know this, right? It's really easy as you start looking at law schools to get kind of swept up in like the rankings. And then all you care about is going to the highest ranked school that you can get into. And I imagine that you've seen some situations where that hasn't turned out the best for people. I have.
And that's kind of what I was getting at the beginning, is that what you see on paper, what you see online is not always the reality. And just because some schools are ranked at the top of the rankings doesn't mean that they're the right fit for you. Now, that could be the right fit culturally. It could be the right fit personally. And just like probably what happened when you went on a undergraduate campus, the moment you walk onto a campus, you're going to get a feeling of whether you feel that you can stay there for the next, let's say, 3 years. Because for many students, it's going to be 3 years to go through this experience, unless you have an accelerated program that will allow you to get done sooner, or if you're on a part-time basis and you're going to be there longer. So that being said, you want to make sure that you do have those good questions and you are asking those across the board. But because you don't want to start someplace and then find that it's the wrong fit. And some of those questions may come down to accessibility of faculty. Because at some schools, though they may be ranked very high, you may find that you don't really have a lot of access to get questions answered, to be able to work with faculty, to be able to have that engagement. And you want engagement with your faculty because that's so important, because they are going to not only be advisors to you, but they're going to be mentors to you. And if you make good connections, you're going to be able to, and they see your potential, they're going to open up doors for you too. But if you don't have that available to you, then you're going to have to find that in other ways. One of the things that I have found in many interviews across the Law School Insider podcast is the importance of developing your own network through law school and beyond. And you can start that even before you start law school. But it's important to start building the network potentially where you want to work, in the field that you want to work in, but in general, just with lawyers in general. It doesn't mean that you're going to be working in a courtroom. It doesn't mean that you're going to be working in a specific niche area, but it means that you're going to start to build connections. And as you build those connections, you need to make sure that you are keeping those connections throughout your time in law school, letting people know where you're at, because by keeping connected, letting people know, you are potentially creating some mentors that will help you to be able to see how you might be able to get into the field in different ways. And in a conversation I had with our Dean of Career and Professional Development just recently, he was telling me that only about 20 to 25% of all jobs are ever posted. So with that in mind, you have to have a network and you have to have connections. So starting now and connecting with people in your local community as you get into law school, joining the state bar and the student section of the state bar where you are at, the student section of the American Bar Association, but not just be a member, but be actively involved and start to meet other lawyers. Make sure that you're putting yourself out there and volunteering to do things. This doesn't have to be a ton of time, but it will pay off in so many dividends in the end.
Absolutely. And Chris, I just from personal experience, I can say from my first year out of law school, as a first year associate at a big law firm to this day, right now, I still get a lot of business from the relationships I built while I was in school. And most of those relationships were strengthened because I was in the same organization with those other students or lawyers. And so it is so important to build those connections and relationships now, and they become friendships. And what happens is all these people you're in school with now, at some point down the road, they will be at different companies. Some of them will still be lawyers. Some of them will not be lawyers, but they'll remember you because you built a friendship with them. And when they need somebody that does what you do, or someone they knows needs somebody that does what you do, they'll refer those people or organizations or companies over to you. And so it is a great thing to do, not just for the business aspect of it, but also for making your law school experience enjoyable. And I think in everything we do, building those relationships and connections are important in having a fulfilling and thriving life. So thank you for giving a lot of advice to law school students in general. I'd love to kind of switch gears here a little bit and get a little more specific, right? Not only is law school very difficult and challenging for a lot of people, for most of us, I'd say. The first year of law school can be so scary. Mostly, at least for me, it was mostly because of the fear of the unknown, right? Not only was it challenging, but just not knowing what to expect. And quite frankly, most of the movies out there that depict first year law school give you something to be afraid of. And so, Chris, I'd love to talk a little more about the first year of law school. This episode will air near the end of December. And so many law school students will be ending their exams or maybe just got done with their exams. And so this becomes, for all of you that have not gone to law school, here's the deal. You get done with your exams. Law school for me was different than any other school because I could kind of judge where I was during the semester based off of my quizzes and tests, and I could decide whether to ramp it up or maybe slack off a little bit so that I could put that energy in another class that I needed to ramp up. But man, in law school, at least in my first year, there were no quizzes or tests during the year. It was just the final exam. And so it is a stress-filled time. And then when you're done with the exams, you don't get your grades right away. Many schools take 30 or so days to get those exam grades back to students. Unfortunately, when I was there, it took until the middle of February for us to get our exam grades back. And so you're talking about so much stress. I mean, just worrying about your grades, not even during the holiday break, but even through the beginning of your first semester. So, Chris, I'd love some advice for these law school students are going into the holidays and maybe a little stressed out about how they did on the exams. Do you have any words of wisdom for them?
Well, first and foremost, I think I would have to say for those students that are in their first term of law school and moving into their second term and are in kind of that limbo period right now, I would say just relax. Take a breath, relax, because you don't know where you stand right now. And when your grades do start coming back, assess how you did. And if you need to follow up, if you need to question, if you need to get information about what you may have done wrong, make sure that you're following your policies, because in some schools there are specific ways in which you can get feedback or not get feedback, and you need to make sure that you're following that. But make sure that you understand, and you understand what you did wrong, so that in the future you can make adjustments and then move forward. Now, if you've done things well, then keep doing what you've been doing. But if you have had some stumbling blocks, then you need to take the time to be able to step back, reassess, reevaluate, and then move forward, and not get held up by the kind of the huge concerns about failing out or things like that at this point. Because you just need to take it one day at a time and deal with things one day at a time. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but it's so important because you only have so many breaks in law school, and you need to take the time to be able to reconnect with yourself, reconnect with your family, because a lot of times when you're going through law school, some of that gets set to the wayside. And that's one of the big things that some people don't understand is when you go to law school, sometimes, we'll hear from parents that will say, well, I'm not hearing from my child. And I say to the parent, I said, you need to understand that one, these are adults, but two, you have to understand that your child and you need to have a communication plan for law school, because there are going to be times in the term where they may not talk to you because of the stress, because of what they're doing. And for them to understand that will definitely help them to better understand what the student's going through. Now, at the same time, as a law student, you need to be communicating with the person that is there for you, that's there to support you, so that they understand what you're going through, and not just leave it completely for them to guess and to be worried about you. So those are some things specifically. Now, I think that you also want to make sure that do things that are going to help to reset yourself for the next term as you're going through the break that you have. So if you have a 2-week break, and if you need sleep, then get sleep. But if you also have gone through a period over the last couple of weeks and you haven't been eating well, you need to get your body back into that regular rhythm so that you're going to be ready for the new term. And you're not going to be getting yourself sick, getting yourself into unwell practices. So you have to have that balance for yourself. And that's one of the struggles sometimes for law students, is finding that personal balance, which, hey, this is a struggle for many people. It's not just law students, but having a balance in life is hard. But when you're going through a stressful thing like law school, sometimes the balance is completely off balance. And you have to be able to be successful in law school, you have to have a balance. You have to have a way to have a separation between the law and yourself as well. So you have to have that time to be able to really focus on the law, but you also have to have time for yourself and to be able to separate yourself from the law too. Because while your life is going to be law school for the next let's say 3 years, you also want to make sure that you don't lose yourself along the way. So those are some things that, especially even as a first-term law student, that I would tell a student is it's going to take you some time to get into the rhythm of what it's going to take for you to be successful. It's not going to happen in the first class. It's going to take a few weeks to figure out what are my faculty really asking me to do here? What's being expected of me? How should I actually be reading these cases? How should I be outlining these cases, briefing these cases? And some of these words may seem, especially if you're not in law school yet, may seem a little bit foreign, but that's okay. You'll understand it when you get into it. But as you get into it and as you start to figure these things out, you start to figure out what are the things that will help me to be most effective with my time and that I will be able to retain the information. Because unlike in your undergraduate experience, in undergrad, you could probably get through a course and cram at the end and still do well. Now, in law school, you might be able to do that, maybe. However, there's an even bigger test that you have to be prepared for, which is at the very end, and that's the bar exam. And unfortunately, the bar exam covers almost everything that you went through in law school. So if you crammed for that test and really didn't let it sink in, you're going to be reteaching it to yourself or going through a professional preparation course and having to get it taught back to you as you're preparing for the bar exam. So it is much more cost effective as well as much more time effective to prepare yourself all the way through and make sure that you completely understand the concepts as you're going through the different courses that you're taking.
Wow, Chris, let me tell you from personal experience that it was very obvious which classes that I retained the information in and which ones I kind of just got through the class. And even if I did well in the class, I didn't, I just brain dumped and I got rid of that information when it came time to study for the bar. So right. And it was painful to have to try to reteach myself that information and the difference between that class and another class where I did retain the information night and day. And so that is, friends and family, if you are in law school or thinking about law school, that's big, because if you're in law school, then I'm willing to make the assumption for the majority of you that you're going to take a bar exam somewhere. And so really, the bigger goal is to make sure you pass that bar exam. And we've got bigger goals than that. But where would you be if you went through law school and you wanted to pass the bar exam, but you weren't able to? And that's not the end of the world either. But why not set yourself up for success by doing what Chris just talked about right there? And you talked about balance a little bit there, Chris. So I'm curious as to what you think about, a first year law student, because friends and family, if you don't know, the first year of law school for many law students is the hardest. I mean, it may be difficult the whole way through, but that first year tends to be the hardest for many law students. And that is the time where, like Chris said, we might vanish and go into our little hole and not communicate with very many people. But I'm curious to know your thoughts on how to have a social life if you're in your first year of law school. Should you not try? Should you try? What could you do to maybe make it better? Any thoughts on that?
I think that I would say that for many students, having a social life is important. And I would say that it is very important to make the connections with your fellow classmates, because those connections are going to maintain not only through law school, but for many students, they're going to maintain throughout their entire professional careers. And some of those connections and friendships that you make in law school are going to open doors for other opportunities down the road. So you want to make sure that you do have a social life in some aspects. Now, it is a fine line, though. There's a fine line between going out and partying every Thursday night, as you might have in undergrad, and being able to responsibly go out, have fun, be able to have that social release and kind of adult conversation outside of the law and not talking about the law, and being able to still study and be able to still understand the concepts. For some students, the concepts are going to come much easier than others. And in some classes, you're going to find that the concepts are going to come much easier than in other classes. So in some terms, you may find that you really don't feel that you have the ability to be able to have that social life. Now, when I say social life, I mean, social life could mean going out with friends. And I think that there is a definite benefit to that. But there also is a benefit to being able to just have time to do things that are important to you, whether it is that you want to work out 3 times a week and you set aside that time to do that. And that helps you to refocus and reconnect with yourself and be able to be ready for the week and for the information that you are trying to take in. It could mean that you want to watch a specific television show every week. And that's important to you because it lets you just kind of have that release and be able to just set aside the law for that period of time and be able to kind of go into a different reality per se. And that's okay too. But it's finding what you have to do, the amount of time that you need to be taking to be able to be successful, as well as finding the time that you need to read, how many times do you need to read it, etc. Faculty here at Western Michigan University Cooley Law School, I hear them say, especially for first-term law school students, they talk about the 3-read method. And now many students may say after they've been in law school, 3 reads on a case is overkill. But when you're starting, it is important to have that time where the first time you read it, you're reading for the concepts. You're trying to get a general idea of what is going on. You have your class, and then you read it again after the class, and you get a better understanding. Actually, no, let me step back. It's 3 reads before the next class. So you get the case assigned, you read it the first time just to generally understand it. Then you read it for more thorough understanding. And then you read it a third time prior to your class to be prepared for class. Because in class, there are many times where you may get called on to be able to speak on the case. Yes. And I'm sure that, Dale, you've had that opportunity, whether you liked it or not. And a lot of times, unless you're raising your hand and saying, pick me, and sometimes that's the best thing you can do, especially early on, is if you raise your hand right at the beginning of class in the first term and you put your hand up there, you might not get called on all the time. But it depends on the faculty member.
Tricks of the trade.
But that being said, you'd have to get into that rhythm and get into that flow. And you won't be able to do that like I said, in the first week. You won't be able to do that. You might not even be able to do that in the first month. But you need to make sure that you are taking more time at the front end. And as you get more used to it, you're going to be able to probably take a little less time because you'll have a better system in place for being able to better understand the content.
Yeah. And you talked about getting away and talking about something other than law school. What I loved doing when I was in law school for a little bit of a break there was that I would actually hang out with some of the other grad school students that weren't law school students because we were all looking for a break. And all of us understood that we were in challenging curriculums like the med school students. And so we were okay having kind of a calm social outing and just talking about any and everything not having to do with our particular school or studies. And so that was always something I enjoyed doing, and that did, for me personally, did give me a little bit of that stress release and a stress reducer for me. Now, you also talked about maybe reading the cases a few times before class. That is something I'm a fan of, something, I talk about skimming the case first and then reading it. And so, I wrote the book, 33 Keys to Law School Success, and I've got some of those tidbits in there and some of the bigger kind of concepts. And so, it's amazing, Chris, how many of the things that you're talking about are in line with the thoughts and concepts that I had coming out of law school, trying to share that information with law school students. And how much great information that people who are in law school or contemplating law school can get from your podcast. I mean, some really, really good information on how to survive law school, how to have success in law school. And so if you're anywhere in that ballpark, whether you're in law school, first, second, or third year, or you're in undergrad and you're just toying with the idea of being in law school, I'm going to just take this opportunity once again to encourage you to take a second and listen to a few of Chris's podcasts, the Law School Insider. And I'm sure after you listen to a few, you'll be hooked and you'll keep listening to them. So Chris, thank you so much. This has been chock full of great information for law school students. I wish we could talk a lot more, but we're kind of coming up on our time here. And so I'm going to make sure we transition to a few things that I always want to do on every podcast episode. And so that first thing is talking about obstacles and failures, because Chris, as you know, a lot of times people go through these obstacles and failures and difficult times in their lives. And sometimes they might feel like they're failing, but as they look back on that situation, hopefully they pull the lessons from that and learn that they needed that obstacle to succeed, or they needed to overcome that challenge to get to that next level. And so I'd love for you to share maybe an obstacle that you've seen some law school students face, and that, you're looking at it from the outside and you see the lessons they got from that obstacle, whether they got it then or later.
I want to say that every student has obstacles. Every person in life will have some obstacles. Now,
absolutely,
it's how you allow those obstacles to affect you, which is going to impact your direction. And I've had many experiences seeing students that have overcome so many things to be able to not only get into law school, but get through law school. One student, and I'm going to share this student's story, and it's actually a student, a lawyer that was on our the Law School Insider podcast. His name is Shane Hilliard, and he was an adult student that went through law school, and he actually was on our podcast twice, because we were talking so long that we broke it up into 2 episodes. But the first part of the episode really talked about his journey into law school, and like many students, especially students that may be adult students that are considering law school, that might not have thought about going to law school at first, might not have had the stellar undergraduate experience. He struggled with getting into a law school at first. He applied many times because he took the LSAT, and at that time, he had a pretty average score. I think it was in the mid-upper 140s. And as most people will know, the LSAT ranges from 120 to 180. So you can see that's about middle of the road. However, when he was applying to schools, they were saying, no, and you're not going to be able to get in, and keep taking the LSAT. And he did. And he kept persevering, and he kept pushing forward. And he then was told about our school. He applied to our school and ended up being accepted. He ended up going through law school and doing amazingly well. However, he had some other bumps along the way. And for some people, these bumps would be complete roadblocks that would have derailed their process. In his law school experience, in one of the episodes in my show, he talks about the fact that in the middle of his experience, his wife was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, wow.
And he became not only a law school student, which he was, and he was the father of 2 and the stepfather of 2, but he became the primary caregiver for not only his wife, who was going through cancer treatment, but also all 4 kids. Wow. And now, as I just said, for some people, that might have been a roadblock. However, he knew that he needed to ask for assistance in some aspects. He knew he needed to tell people what was going on. He had complete support from faculty, from administrators, and he continued on. He didn't stop. He persevered. He ended up being the valedictory speaker at his graduation, and he's been tremendously successful, passed the bar on his first try, and has been tremendously successful in his career. Now, that's just one story. I see these stories all the time. And now this is just one adult student. But there are traditional students that have gone through tremendous obstacles to be able to do this. What I'm trying to say here is that if you're thinking about law school, but you think that there is something in the way, don't let that stop you. Ask questions. See if those roadblocks are really roadblocks, or if they're just barriers. And if they're just barriers, find out what you have to do to overcome those barriers. Because if your goal is to go to law school and to become a lawyer, see what you have to do it, and push forward. Because there are some things that would stop you from going to law school. I'm not going to deny that. But for many people, you can get past many barriers and be able to still be considered for law school if it's the right fit for you.
Yes. And so, just a reminder not to let those barriers stop you from reaching your goals. The question is, how important is that goal to you? And what are you willing to sacrifice to get to that goal, to knock down those barriers and make it to that goal that's so important to you? And that's a very, very personal question, because all of us have different levels of what we're willing to sacrifice to get to our varying goals. And so I love those words of encouragement. Thank you, Chris, because I know that there are probably some people listening who are on the fence and maybe saw some barriers as roadblocks. And hopefully now they get a better picture of whether it really is a roadblock or a barrier. So thank you for that. And we're wrapping up now, Chris. So we're gonna switch and get to a really fun part of the show here. And it's called the hot seat scenario. It's something that I love doing with every guest. So let's just jump right into it. Chris, I'm going to force you to swap lives with one of these two people, and you get to choose between person A, who works about 40 to 50 hours a week, is living check to check, and spends an average of 2 to 3 hours a night watching TV or surfing the internet just to wind down. Or you can choose person B, who makes several $100,000 per year, works crazy long hours, and has almost no free time at all. Both of these people wish they were pursuing their passions, but neither of them is doing that. You're going to have to jump into one of these lives and find a way to eventually live your purpose and passion. So, Chris, tell us, which person do you prefer to swap into, and what are the first few steps that you take to get to that life of purpose and passion?
I think I would go with person A myself. I mean, I would much rather have a lower salary, but also have a life. And now, while that means that while this person right now is not at a point where they feel like they have actualized that goal for themselves of what that life truly is. I think for me, the first couple steps that I would take is really try to identify what is holding me back, what is standing in my way to be able to be happy with where my life currently is. And you have to have a balance, because if you don't have the balance in your life, you'll never be able to have happiness in your life. And while money can do some things, it can't buy you happiness. It can never buy you happiness. You can always make more money by doing other things, and hopefully other things that you are passionate about. But if you don't have the time, if you sacrifice the relationships, you can never get those back.
Yes. And so thank you for playing along, Chris. I love getting the different answers from people. I mean, I just get such a wide range of answers from the hot seat scenario. And so I have to do that at the end of every episode. And so thank you for playing along and sharing a little bit more in case somebody's in that scenario right now. They maybe heard what you had to say, and maybe that will get them closer to their purpose and passion. So, Chris, we have actually reached the end of this podcast episode. Thank you so much for sharing with our friends and family, specifically our law student or potential law student listeners out there. If you're not a law school student or considering law school, I know that you can pull lessons out of this as well. And so, friends and family, Chris has really spent his time here sharing with us. We're going to wrap this up with just two more things from Chris. Chris, I'd love for you to share some contact information so that our friends and family know where they can get in touch with you. Maybe how to listen to your podcast, or how to get in touch with you some other ways, if you got that contact information. And then just go straight into your motivational quote or mantra, something you use to give you that little extra oomph during the day when you need a little bit more motivation. So, Chris, go ahead and leave us with your contact information and your motivational quote or mantra.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show today. It has been my pleasure to be here and to speak with everyone today. Now, if anyone has any questions about law school, it doesn't have to be specifically about our law school. I would be happy to talk to you. I also am really interested in hearing if any of you have specific topics that are pertinent to your own journey that you'd love to hear on the Law School Insider podcast. Send me an email. My email is Lewis, LEWISCH at Cooley, COOLEY.edu. And I'd be happy to talk with all of you about that. You can find the Law School Insider on iTunes, Stitcher. You can also, the website is info.cooley.edu/Law School Insider. So pretty easy. And you can come on over. You can see we've got over 80 episodes in there, and they come out once a week on Thursdays. So you can listen along and learn along with other students and other people that are interested in law school and law school success. Now, in regards to a motivational or inspirational quote, there's actually a couple that come to mind if you would indulge me just a second.
Absolutely. Please.
There are, I think, three that just pop into my head. And the first is that nothing worth having comes easy. I kind of talked about that you do have to overcome barriers, and you have to be able to do that. And I don't know who actually said that in the first time, but it's one that always has stayed with me. Another one is one that Zig Ziglar stated, and I really like what Zig had to say in his life. And Zig Ziglar stated that you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. And I think that not only for people that are thinking about law school, but just in life in general, sometimes we get caught up in being willing to start, being willing to take the leap, and being able to have the courage to be able to jump when you may not want to jump. And then the final one that I'll throw out there is wake up with determination and go to bed with satisfaction.
Wow. 3 really great quotes there, Chris. Thank you again for sharing, spending time with our friends and family here at Live the Goals Podcast. We really appreciate it. And friends and family, you know that you can find links to the information we talked about here today, as well as a brief summary of some of the information that Chris has shared with us on his show notes page. Just go to LiveTheGoals.com and enter Chris in the search bar, and his show note page will pop right up. And so again, Chris, thank you. And until next time, friends and family, remember to set goals that matter and live the goals you set. Friends and family, now there's a new, more convenient way to listen to Live the Goals Podcast. The new Live the Goals Podcast app on both iTunes for iPhone and iPad users and Google Play for the rest of you. That's right. All of the awesome interviews, as well as the motivating and inspiring Word of the Day episodes, will be right at your fingertips in an easy and convenient app for your phone. With the new app, you'll be able to search, sort, or mark your favorite episodes, and there's even a quick link to connect with me by email. Not only that, the Live the Goals Podcast app is the only place where you'll be able to get the special bonus episodes and information I release from now on. I'm always looking for ways to better serve you and make it easy for you to stay motivated and learn from our guests. And I know the new Live the Goals Podcast app will do just that. It only takes a few seconds to download, so go to iTunes or Google Play, search for Live the Goals, all one word, or search for Dale Richardson, and the new podcast app should pop right up. So until next time, remember to set and reach goals that matter.
Thanks for checking out the show today, and make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. We hope you take away something that helps fill your life with purpose and laughter. And make sure you head over to LiveTheGoals.com for more info on guests and resources. Remember to set and reach goals that lead you to a life of purpose and passion.